Connectwise Technologies. We're excited to have you here today, and we hope to have a lot of information that you can take from this webinar and use practically in your business, your small to medium-sized business straight away. My name's Jeremy Bays. I'm one of the co-hosts of this. Jim Peterson is here from Connectwise, and he's going to be our lead presenter today going over this information. After the webinar is over, you will receive in your email a questionnaire. I think it's a four-question questionnaire. We'd like to ask you to take a few moments to fill that out because we're striving to make these webinars relevant and just flat out better for you. If you have any concerns or questions or just even topics that you really like to see discussed and in broad strokes, let us know. We'd love to make that happen for you. So I'm going to turn this over right now to Jim. So Jim, take it away. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate that. Just giving everybody a quick high level of the topics today. We're going to talk a little bit about the threat landscape, go over some risks and responsibilities, and then really dig into that cyber insurance conversation because we know, there's a few stats that we'll probably talk about today that make this a really poignant topic in today's world, right? I know we already went through the quick introduction, so we'll just get past this and jump right into things. One of the first things we always like to talk about whenever we're talking about that protection conversation is the small business. And small businesses are still pretty large businesses when we think of people and revenue. But a lot of times they don't think of themselves as the primary target for bad actors. And what we know now for sure is that roughly 82% of the time, right, ransomware attacks are targeting that small business community. And so we know the impact that it has. A couple stats that we don't have in this deck that we like to talk about is the average ransomware cost in today's world is hitting $569,000 per event. So we know this is financially very impactful. And a lot of small businesses just can't afford that type of payment. They have to rely on their cyber insurance to help protect them. But a cyber insurance policy that can cover that amount can also be challenging to get because the current landscape in today's attack vectors, right, is getting more complex all the time. I mean, we hear of AI attacks, we hear of ransomware as a service, we hear of insider threats that are continuing to grow. It's really challenging because we're trying to protect multiple locations at the same time while also getting our jobs done on a day-to-day basis and being able to afford things like good cyber insurance that'll cover us if and when we ever need it. But let's get to a
Can I
couple of
ask you,
stats.
can I
Yeah,
ask you
please.
some quick questions going on? First of all, what's a bad actor? Is that like George Clooney in the movie The American or something, or maybe it's a 14-year-old in China on his computer, or maybe it's even the Russian mafia and the Secret Service and what is exactly a bad actor?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, it's kind of all of the above, right? So we put bad actors into a couple of different categories, and there's two ways to look at the threat, right? There's bad actors, and then there's accidental actors, right? So bad actors are going to be those nefarious companies, people. A lot of times these are organizations that have HR departments, recruiting firms, bonus structures, hundreds of employees that are actually doing this work. It can be the kid in the basement that just has time on their hands and trying to attack. It could be someone who has a personal vendetta against a business. It's really hard to put a label on what a bad actor is, but we know one thing about bad actors. They're doing it to damage a business. Now, they may look like a revenue, right? So I'm doing it to damage a business or to gain money from them, or I'm doing it to hurt their reputation or their revenue. So bad actors are kind of in that category. We use that term more often than not. We probably shouldn't though, Jeremy. It's a good point. We should probably call them threat actors because we also have the insider threat, the accidental attacker who accidentally misleads or misuses information in a financial or medical or even defense area where private information or really confidential information gets leaked, and we still consider that a breach. So big term, tough to use, but at the end of the day, that bad actor is typically the one trying to gain money or damage a business. So a long answer there, but thanks, great question. So, and if we look at some of the stats, right, if we just talked about, and if you're not familiar with Verizon's data breaches and incident or investigation report, right? They go through and try to collect information from all incidents and breaches specifically that happen. Obviously, we're showing almost a million incidents analyzed in 2024. But a couple things came through as really key points to think about when we're talking through how to defend against them or how we cover them, what cyber insurance companies are looking to protect against. First one is credentials, right? And this is a real challenge still in today's world. We think of multi-factor authentication, especially Jeremy, you and I, we think everybody's got it, right? Everybody's got it across the board. We find out that's just not the case. A lot of institutions are still using single authentication methods, just username and password. And we know, unfortunately, in today's world, that's just not good enough. Even lower quality MFA can still be a challenge because, as an example, I can send you a fake password reset link. I can capture that new username and password plus the multi-factor authentication token and then act as you on in the services you're using. So we have to be really aware that credentials need to continue to change the processes we're doing to authenticate a person, but also those phishing and exploits, right? If we think of phishing, I'm trying to get you to click the link, typically through an email. And that exploits, that's going to be vulnerabilities in software and hardware that are continuing to grow, right? As we're adding new and more solutions to our business stack every day, right? Those are going to have some sort of exploits over time, whether it's incorrect code or lack of patching or some other problem that can be a vulnerability to a business. We just have to be aware that those are the three big areas that we're trying to continually put our arms around and protect small businesses from. And if you really love technical reading, the Verizon DIBA report is actually very interesting because it doesn't just show information from a holistic perspective. It will get down to individual categories and sectors of businesses. So if you're financial, if you're medical, if you're defense, if you're service-based, it'll start to tell you what the specific risks are for your organization. I know we read that, but not everybody else does. So um, another real challenge in today's world is the growth of artificial intelligence. Now, we hear it from two perspectives. Obviously, we promote the use of AI or even automation to help increase capacity and reduce the time of response in an organization, right? We think of this as a good thing, but obviously, bad actors can use it in the same vein. They want to attack more people in the same amount of time. They can leverage AI tools to do that. They can also use things like generative AI to have better understanding of who they're attacking. I may get, Jeremy, your email address. I do some AI searching, try to do a little in-depth investigation. I get your first name, your last name, where you work, maybe any resumes, your LinkedIn profile. I can pull a lot of information very quickly without having to do all the groundwork myself. So just understand AI has good and bad uses. We'll continue to use it for good, but we just need to be aware that it's increasing a businesses or a bad actors or threat actors' ability to attack more organizations in the same amount of time.
At a seminar I recently attended, they were speaking of AI, and everybody knows that AI stands for artificial intelligence, but the presenter said maybe we should think of it more as automation. And like you were saying, the fact that we can automate on both the good side and the bad side says speaks volumes because the bad actors can automate some of their attacks to where they don't even have to be present to do them or to run them, or they can cut their time in half or by a third of what it takes to attack a company or a business. And therefore, they can attack 3 to 4 to 5 times more businesses all in the same amount of time. And as you said, some people are bad actors and just flat out do this as a business, and they're getting paid off of these breaches and such. So that's more money in their pocket. So maybe AI instead of artificial intelligence, we should read that a little more as maybe automated intelligence or something like that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And you hit on a point that we don't talk about a lot. Most of the attacks in today's world are automatically created. Basically, a person or a bad actor rarely gets involved until some action has been taken, till someone's clicked the link or given a credential or done something. That's when the people get involved to do the investigation side of things. But yeah, you hit it on the head. Most of it's automated. They're just blanketing millions of addresses all the time, trying to get that one person to click. So great point. Um, so one thing we like to talk about, again, I think it doesn't get enough love, is just to talk about passwords. If we know credentials and humans are roughly 70% of the incidents and breaches that happen? What's something we can do that just helps in today's world? And so a question we like to ask, and we won't ask people to raise hands, but we'll just think about this, like how long does it take to crack an 8-character password? So a lot of times we use shorter passwords, and we think of this as the complex passwords. So we're obviously using upper lowercase and numbers and hopefully some sort of punctuation. We're trying to make it hard because we know the ABC123, the password, right, which hopefully nobody's using. Those are actually almost automatically cracked today because they can run a set of password hacks against a system pretty easily. But if we think of this in times, right, it would take roughly 8 months in the current solutions of technology to crack that password. So little things like that, having a complex password, at least 8 characters, helps significantly because in all honesty, nobody's going to spend 8 months cracking most organizations. Like if we were the CIA or the White House or something like that, somebody might put that kind of time against it. But for most businesses, nobody's just going to assign that type of resource to it. So a couple of interesting facts here, obviously, is that grows in the number of characters, it gets significantly harder to crack, right? If we look at that one, we're looking at a lot of years to do an 18 character password with today's technology. So just a couple of things to think about. If we know credentials are a challenge, we can definitely do a complex password to help us out. But at the same time, Jeremy, I'd probably say this, and you might say this too. I walk around day to day assuming my passwords are breached. I assume that I've given my password out. I use a password manager. All my passwords are different. I can't remember half of them any time of the day, but I do that so if one gets cracked, they don't all get cracked. And this is where MFA really comes in. We can do a great job of creating strong passwords, but without that multi-factor authentication, proving you are who you say you are, we still have some risks and some challenges out there. Now, thinking about those risks and responsibilities, one other piece that we like to talk about specifically when we're talking about cybersecurity insurance is the CIA triad. Now, this is a different CIA than I was just talking about, right? This is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And the reason we like to talk about data whenever we're talking about cyber insurance is this is really the heart of where cybercrime comes from. They want to impact data in some way. They want to take it and use it. They want to take it and sell it. They want to stop you from being able to access it. So when IT professionals like Jeremy and I, when we think about data, we think of it in three buckets. How do we keep it confidential? How do we make sure only authorized individuals can access specific information? This gets really easy when we think of files and folders on a traditional server. It gets a little harder when we start talking about SaaS applications and different platforms like HR platforms in financial applications, because we have to get real specific on what people can see. But still, it's something that's very important and we have to think about. Then there's the integrity, which gets almost no conversation in today's world. Is the data good? Is it accurate, complete through its life cycle? And we don't think of people attacking data midstream. So if I have a financial application, let's say a bad actor could get in and change that information. That's the integrity side of things that we have to watch out for. It can make us do bad things, right? If we mistakenly have information or information that's incorrect, we can make bad decisions for our organization. We can also push out applications and software that has faults in it or risks in it. It's a real challenge. And last is the one we talk about all the time, Jeremy, right? Is the availability. How do we make sure that data is available when an authorized user wants to access it? This is going to be your backup, your BCDR. And we talk about this data protection side of things because at the end of the day, most of the time, if we're in complete control of our data, when a breach happens, we typically are going to be able to minimize the expense to the business. Whenever any of these three are broken, we know we're going to maximize the expense to the business. If the availability goes down, we know we're going to have to pay for restoration. The confidentiality goes down, we know we're going to have to pay typically for extortion because they may threaten to release that information. If the integrity is wrong, and again, we have to be able to recover that information to make it whole again. So we know if any of these three are broken, that's when the money goes out the door, unfortunately.
One example I've used in the past is imagine if I took your personal banking account and just inflated the numbers by $5,000 or deflated the numbers by $5,000. What kind of decisions would you make based on that data integrity? You're household budget would be completely off. Now imagine that on a business. If we, inflate it or deflate it, we compromise that integrity. You will make poor business choices because the information that you have is not valid. And perhaps at midstream it was intercepted, manipulated, and then sent along again. So, yeah, the integrity is one that often gets neglected, but it's super important on a business side.
I love that. Such a simple example. I might have to steal that a little bit from you, Jeremy. That's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. Um, yeah, so let's think about that. And when we talk about cyber insurance, kind of the main question is what level of risk are you willing to accept? And so a couple ways to look at this is kind of on the cost side. So if we know a ransom is going to cost us on average 569,000, we think of the reputation side, that's harder to calculate because if reputation is damaged, depending on your industry, it could be significant to future revenue. It could be less significant depending on your industry again, but we have to be aware of this. And then what's the risk to our the people that are close to us? We think of employees or clients and vendors. If we accidentally release that information, what risk do we put to them when something bad happens? So we have to think about it in all three cases because the good news is cyber insurance can help with all three of those. The bad news is if we don't get the right cyber insurance, we may be protecting the wrong thing. So we have to understand our level of risk. So getting right into cyber insurance, we'll just jump right past that. Three areas, and there are more areas of coverage, but the three we're going to talk about today is the incident response coverage, the first party coverage, and the third party coverage. Now, I'm going to start by saying we are not cyber insurance agents, so we're just providing some information to get real details on what you should do and what your coverage needs to be. We need to make sure there's an authorized cyber insurance dealer working with you on that. But we'll start with the incident response coverage because a lot of times this is the real challenging part. Let's say a bad actor gets in, encrypts our information and steals our data. We can pay for that restoration. That may be the 569,000. But now we have to go back and do a lot of things. We have to prove what happened. We have to pay legal fees to, especially if there's any PII or confidential or intellectual property information in there. We obviously have to communicate that with the rest of the world, and we have to manage that crisis. We want to make sure that's covered because this can be a significantly expensive endeavor, especially that IT forensic investigations, because oftentimes in today's world, that's people on site that normally have to fly to our location and have to stay there, pull all of the information, make sure they understand all the logs and document what happened. Now, we also have to realize that if we don't have a redundant environment or a backup protection environment, right, that system is down while those teams are pulling that forensic information. So just stuff to think about on the incident response. The first party coverage, that's going to be the common when we talk about cyber extortion or ransomware. We think of those kind of combined, but we do want to say a lot of times a policy will have an extortion amount that it will cover and a ransom amount it will cover. And just for a quick definition, extortion is when we pay the bad actors not to release our information to others. Ransom is when we pay the bad actors to restore access to our systems. So ransomwares are kind of the deletion or encryption events. Extortion is I have your data, I'm going to send it to the rest of the world. And those can have different values on your policy. So it's something to understand. If you have 50,000 in extortion and 1 million in ransomware, right? You got to make sure you understand what type of event you have. But business interruption for insurance, super important, especially during that IT forensic investigation time when the systems are down. But several other areas where that first party coverage is really important. Then we have the scarier one, the third party coverage. This is when we're affecting other people and we have to provide finances to help restore that access, whether it's privacy, whether we are challenging network security of others, some regulatory fines that can be imposed or for our organization. And lots of challenges in that world. So just thinking of those three types of coverage is the three that we want to make sure we have on most cyber insurance policies. But I'm not saying it's exactly right for you, right? We have to have a good conversation, but at least these three will help cover most major incidents. Now, how we look at this and we think of that exposure side of things and kind of aligning it with the types of descriptions. So, on the left side are the exposure categories that we would talk about. And we won't go into this in super detail, but your cyber insurance agent will, because they want to understand what is the risk level you're willing to accept in several areas in your industry, in your business, with your size, how you work, your tolerance for risk. They may go up and down on your first party legal versus your data recovery versus your business interruption. But at the end of the day, it's trying to understand how we align that security risk specifically with the level of insurance you're going to get. So expect to answer a lot of questions on different type of situations that you could get into if there was ever a cyber event. Because a couple things to think about that, Jeremy, you'd probably jump in on this too, that we don't normally talk about is we think of being attacked, right? So somebody got into our information and did something to us. A lot of times we think of the third party risks as well. What if a vendor that we're connected to for data transfer is the start of the attack and it comes through that channel and affects us? We need to make sure that they have the right cyber insurance to protect us in that organization, or vice versa. If we're the attacking party and it goes through the channel to them, we got to make sure we have the right cyber insurance to protect them if necessary. So it's not just an individual being attacked, it's like how we're connected to the rest of the world.
And you can imagine the complexities of this just by looking at something as simple as car insurance. It's who hit who and what happened and what was going on at the time and was it a full moon at night or whatever, or did someone run a turn signal? That's something very simple like driving a car down the road. Now multiply that tenfold or a hundredfold in your business. What were you doing on that day and what was going on and what were your customers doing on that day and what was your competition doing on that day? And you've got a lot of variables here that need to be addressed.
You got the great simple examples that really bring this home. Appreciate that, Jeremy. That's really super helpful. Yeah. So thinking about that market, right? So if you've been in the cyber insurance, I guess, world for a few years, you know that we had a lot of struggles from about 2019 to around 2023, where the insurance providers were struggling to figure out how to price cyber insurance and what people needed. So we went through this really weird period of time where we would have very low premiums. A lot of times people say that their insurance didn't pay out well is because they didn't have the right policy. And then finally, the cyber insurance market figured it out. They understand what it takes to avoid the majority of attacks that are out there. How can basically the last bullet is what we're trying to say here. They understand what it takes to minimize the payout. They've figured this out, which is great. And they've told us these are the solutions that you need to have in place for us to, number one, offer a policy, and maybe even number two, offer you an affordable policy, because those are obviously two different things. We can get the policy, but if we don't have the right technology in place to protect the organization, that policy is going to be more expensive, just like your driving example, Jeremy, right? If we don't obey any laws, we have lots of tickets out there, lots of accidents, our insurance premium is going to be higher than if we have a good record. And technology, process, and people fall into this from the cybersecurity inside as well. Now, a couple of interesting pieces, if we think about where these claims are coming from, we like to talk about the total cost of an event, right? So if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see things like fraudulent payments, and cyber insurance are covering that at about a 21% clip. In the bottom left-hand corner, we'll see extortion payments being about 16, but that forensic side is almost 20%. That's a very expensive piece. Privacy and counsel, 17%. So if we look at where a dollar is going from a cyber insurance claim, in our mind, we typically think ransom or extortion, but it's really a smaller piece of the pie to the total cost of a cyber event. We have to realize that if we're not covering all these areas, right, we're then on the hook to pay that amount. So next we're going to get into kind of the application process. And what we want to say here is, again, we're not brokers, we're not agents, but just the kind of questions that we want to be prepared to answer when we go to get a good cyber insurance policy. Because a lot of times, if I look back again to that 2019, 2020 timeframe, we typically get asked three questions. What industry is your business in? How many employees you have? And what's your revenue? And from there, they would create you a cyber insurance policy. Now, I think we've all learned, and we probably would all know, that doesn't seem like enough questions to ask to understand if a company is going to be more or less susceptible to a cyber attack. So we've gotten better at this. And so if we think of what cyber insurance is created to do, if we have a some sort of technology event typically involving a bad actor, but it doesn't have to involve a bad actor. You know, we have to make sure the company is whole when that event happens. So they need to understand what type of technology you have. So just understand those three questions that they used to ask in 2019 has turned into probably, Jeremy, probably 80 to 100 questions in today's world, something like that. I mean, it's probably the right amount because they have to understand how you're configured, what your protection mechanisms are. Do you follow the processes that are necessary? Because anybody can deploy a solution, but are you maintaining that solution at the proper level to ensure that we can respond to risks and we're keeping it updated and working properly? So questionnaires have gotten much longer, which is good for us because it identifies the challenging areas that we have.
So
Even down, yeah,
what an insurance company is attempting to do is establish a baseline. So they want to see what your security posture is, or a baseline, and then they evaluate that and then bring their policy according to that. So if your baseline is higher or you're more protected, typically speaking, your policy is going to be more affordable or better coverage. If your baseline is way lower, if you drive a I don't know 1978 Ford Pinto, your insurance is going to be higher because the thing blows up when you turn left. One of
yeah.
those kind of
Again, I love it. You got the great ones. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they want to understand where you're at so they can assign the right policy level and the right risk for them. So understand if you pay a lot more, the risk for them is higher, and so that should mean we kind of understand that to be the risk for us is higher. Even down to you know do you have endpoint protection was a question for a long time as well. And that can be very misleading because I could use a very minimal solution and check yes to that box. Yes, I have endpoint. And when we say endpoint protection, we're saying what we would typically call antivirus years ago. Now it's typically endpoint detection and response, or hopefully managed detection and response, something like that. So a more advanced solution. Before they would say, do you have endpoint protection? We would say yes if we even had basic antivirus. In today's world, they want to know specifically what type of solution you're using because they know some solutions are better than others at stopping things like ransomware. As an example, antivirus, not great at stopping ransomware because it normally won't stop unknown issues that encrypt systems, where an endpoint detection or managed detection response will stop that. So they know the risk is higher with antivirus than it is with EDR or MDR, just giving them more ammunition to do the right policy at the right rate. Email security is another one. We want to make sure we know, let me say step back, we know email is the most common location or vector of attack, whether it's phishing, whether it's business email compromise, whether it's fraud. All of these things fall from an email system typically. So they know that that is a real challenging area. They want to understand specifically how you're securing your email environment. You have multi-factor authentication 100% deployed to every user. Are you using some sort of anti-phishing or anti-malware solution to try and protect incoming inbound email? What are you doing to protect this environment? Knowing the things like advanced threat protection, ATP, can help eliminate a lot of attacks before they get to the user's inbox. Again, one really important piece of this that the cyber insurance companies know there's a real threat. Obviously, talked about multi-factor authentication. We can't talk about this enough, especially if you don't have it. Hopefully, everybody on this webinar is like, I got it, I'm good to go. But at the end of the day, we just want to be aware that any area that is exposed without multi-factor authentication is a risk to your organization, no matter how complex your password is. We want to do complex password because it does help us quite a bit. But at the end of the day, if it's just a username and password and anybody can get in, if that's even accidentally breached, we have a real problem on our hands.
So when we talk about multi-factor, we're talking about these three factors: who you are, what you know, and what you have. So the more of those boxes you check, the stronger your authentication is. So the what you know is your password. I know my password is solo cup 13. Don't ever use that. It's a horrible password. Um, who I am. Maybe my fingerprint or my biometrics or something like that. That can be faked, but we add it with who I am and what I have. Um, Maybe it's my smartphone or perhaps a token, a code. So who you
Yeah.
are, what you know, and what you have. And the more of those boxes you check, the stronger your authentication becomes.
Super important and lots of ways to do this. This should be a continual conversation in every technology business meeting is, are we doing enough to authenticate who people are? Should always be a good question because we're continually advancing this world. And a lot of times people think this is a checkbox, and there are tiers to multi-factor authentication. You mentioned tokens versus text. There's a lot of ways to do this that improve the security even further. And we want to make sure we're continuing to advance as bad actors are finding ways through traditional or basic multi-factor processes. Another one that we're constantly talking about that can significantly drive up or down that premium is backups. And I'll say that we don't normally use the term backups a whole lot anymore. And it's only because that typically is one piece of what we call holistic data protection. When we think of backups, we're typically thinking of protecting workstations and server information, maybe our cloud information. But if we look at this a little bit broader and say, how do you ensure availability from that CIA triad of data no matter where it lives? Because if it can be attacked in the cloud, it is a vulnerability for us. So how we're doing this process, what solutions we're using, what frequency we're doing, are we testing our solutions, are they encrypted? Lots of questions that are coming around this because at the end of the day, one of the things we say probably too much is if you don't control your backups, the bad actors will, right? So we want to make sure that we're always in control of our own restoration. We never want to hand that over. It's the number one guaranteed way to pay. Either pay the bad actors or pay for the recreation of the data, one of the two ways. So we always want to be in control of this piece. And then we got to go to that holistic stack, right? So if we think of we talked about a few specific technologies that are really important in the cyber insurance world. It's then that whole technology stack. How are we completing the process? If we think of technology protection kind of in three phases, we have the outer defense, we have the internal investigation, and then we have the recovery. There's typically five pieces to this, but we'll just talk about it in three in general. Are we doing things to protect the outer perimeter? Are we not allowing people in as much as possible, right? Nothing's 100%. We want to get as close as possible. If something happens internally, are we monitoring and watching for that? Are we looking at the logs and the alerts that come from either an insider threat or an external threat that got into our system? So it can tell us when we have an issue. And then last but not least, and that'd be the security information and event manager, what we often call SIM. And then that last thing, can we recover when we need to? Can we make sure that the data that is business critical, we can always recover? We think about that as a holistic stack. Understand that's how cyber insurance companies are looking at our technology. They complete the stack. Can they do all three of these well? If so, we're in a much better position to get a good policy at a better rate.
I have one more just basic
Yeah, please.
analogy. Imagine you're running a retail store, and so you want customers to come in, but you want customers to come in. You don't want shoplifters to come in. So that's our outer perimeter. Assuming a shoplifter does come in and pilfer an item, perhaps you have security cameras so you can see what's going on. That's your middle layer, your SIM. You can monitor that. Now, your recovery level is, well, do you assume that risk and that item's gone, or do you have that item insured or whatever? And that's your innermost level. So those three levels work together even in the real retail physical space.
Yeah, great. Coming through for us to make sure we hit this home. I love it. Yeah. So if we think about it in that, that's understanding that's the way the cyber insurance companies are looking for it as well. Are we doing a good job defending? Can we alert when something happens? And can we recover if something happens? If we can do those things pretty well, we typically, in most cases, will get a coverage that meets our needs at a price we can afford. Now, the hard question that we can never answer is how much cyber insurance do I need? There's formulas out there to help. But one of the things we want to make sure we convey in this process is we want to think about the big ones that we have to deal with, right? So that'd be the incident response piece, the first party piece and the third party piece. So we would say it like this: how do we understand what happened and we respond to when an issue happens? So that'd be the forensic communication that has a cost associated with it that we can identify whether we're willing to take that risk or whether we need insurance for. If something happens, how do we make sure that our business continues to operate? So if we have an extortion event, a ransom event, if we need business continuity insurance, that's that first side. How do we make sure we have enough business to handle the average event? And again, the average event can typically last a week in duration. So we know that, and it can be much longer, it can be shorter, depending on the size of the breach and the size of your organization. But understand, if your systems are down for a week, hopefully that never happens to you. But what is the cost of continuing that operations to make sure we can start back up when things are whole again? And that last, if we affect someone else, how are we going to pay for that? Because a lot of they're going to sue us, right? If we're the starting point, how do we make sure we protect that organization? Because a couple things to think about on this piece is a lot of organizations, you know, we have a lot of trust. Let me say it like this: we have a lot of trust with people we do business with, especially if they're SaaS applications or online hosted applications that we use. We typically sign the agreements without reading what's in there. And many times, organizations will indemnify themselves of the risk of third party attacks. And I'm not going to point out any specific organizations that do this, but we know there was a major breach a couple of years ago, or major error this year in the airline system, which I'm sure everybody's aware with. Um, and those airlines will say, well, hey, let's sue or let's get, financially whole from that event. But we find out that they were indemnified on this type of attack because they didn't follow the exact proper procedures to recover the environment. So at the end of the day, what we're trying to say here is understand the contracts you're signing, because it could be shifting risk to you. And if we don't have the cyber insurance to protect from that risk, we may not be able to recover those finances. Yep. And so at the end of the day, I mean, that kind of falls into this part. We want to make sure that we answer these truthfully. At the end of the day, whenever we're answering these policies, and Jeremy, this is probably where you come in, because we get these questionnaires and people fill them out to the best of their ability. But a lot of times they're putting incorrect answers because maybe they don't quite understand the technology they're leveraging. At the end of the day, we're signing this saying this is true, right? And so when we go to these processes of filling out our policy information, have a technology person help you out with this, because if we incorrectly answer this, there's a good chance if an event occurs and they find out we misled them, even if it was unintentionally, right, that could completely nullify the policy and dictate that you don't get any of the funds that would have been allocated to you if you answered it truthfully. A really big gotcha that unfortunately a lot of businesses have found out too late in the game. So a couple little questions here. We always love ending on a few questions. So thinking about attacks, right? We think of North America being kind of the hub of technology in a lot of areas. If we think about what percentage of attacks occur in North America, right? We have 25, 53, 93, or 70. Well, we find out 70% of attacks happen in North America. Not surprising. And if we think of the cost to the global economy of cyber crime as $8 trillion, the third largest GDP, a lot of money. 70% of that comes from North America. So we know it is a heavy expense and burden that North America is funding in today's world. Similar, like what percentage of the world's internet comes from North America? An interesting fact here. We think about the world being heavily internet based, right? And we find out roughly 54% of all internet comes from North America. Not surprising. All this is trying to tell us is we're holding a strong burden to the cyber crime industry, and everything we can do to protect our organizations, to deploy great technology, to make sure we're protected with great cyber insurance will help make sure we can continue to stay in business. And so I'll end this with, if you have questions about this, obviously Jeremy's here and I'll start to turn it over to you, but I know you guys do risk assessments. You guys do a lot of things to help organizations be safe and make sure they can get the right policy. But I'll hand it back over to you, Jeremy. Thanks a lot for giving me the time.
All right. Thank you, Jim. A lot of information there presented and wonderful stuff. So I just want to say this as well, make sure it's stated very clearly. We are not insurance agents. We cannot help you with your insurance per se. We do know people that are. So think of us as the people that can introduce you to the people that can legally help you with these. What I can do for you, what we can do here at Century is we can get the conversation rolling and we can direct you to these people that can actually review either your current cybersecurity insurance policy or create a new one for you. So if you have any questions, please reach out. You'll be getting an email shortly with some contact information in it and would be happy to have a discussion with you. Once again, I cannot sell you an insurance policy or even make a recommendation, but we can review your technology stack and I can get you over to some people that can truly, truly help you. So thank you so much for attending our webinar this, I guess this afternoon now here in Central Kansas. And I appreciate your time and your attention. I hope to see you again shortly on our next webinar. Thank you, Jim from Connectwise, for bringing this information to us. And once again, I hope to see you soon. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.